Well, Lena, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, happy to be here.
Thank you. So, I mean, one thing that is really evident in your work is that you have such a strong grasp for storytelling, right? Like whether you're writing a drama or a comedy, you have this real knack for knowing who your characters are, what they want, the worlds they inhabit, all of that. And I think it's a skill that can obviously be learned through practice and experience. But I also think that there's some people who are born with that innate sense of storytelling. So for you, when you think back to little Lena growing up on the south side of Chicago, what was that initial spark for storytelling? Like, where did that come from, and how did you nurture that at an early age?
I really think it came from me constantly sitting in front of my television set with a lot of VHS tapes and going to the movies and hearing the women in my house tell stories, tell each other stories, whether it be by the neighbors, listen to my mom on the phone, telling her girlfriend stories. And I remember like she had a friend named Roxy, Paulette, her name was Laverne. Like this is like classic like black woman and stuff. So what I would get is eavesdropping on how people speak, and particularly black women, how they speak to each other, how their voices change when they're speaking to black men, how their voices change when they're speaking to a black man that they're interested in, and how their voices change when they're talking to black men that they're not. And so it was a mix of that real life blackness that I was around always, and also watching scripted stuff constantly, always, and also growing up, with a multicam comedy type era, in the 90s. So yeah. The storytelling was very precise. It was very fast paced. It was very quick. You had literally like 26 minutes to tell a story. And I think I loved that sort of pacing. I loved those laugh tracks. I loved the pauses. I loved the familiarity, because the truth is of the sitcom, it's literally the same story being told every week, just with a different plot. And the repetitiveness of that was very comforting and interesting. And so really, that's really, I think, where it came from, is watching stuff like The Cosby Show, Martin, obviously a different world, Living Single, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Family Matters, all that stuff. But then also going to the movies, and we see my aunt had this fascination with taking me to go see movies that were filmed in Chicago. That was something she showed me Ferris Bueller. She took me to go see Love Jones when I was way too young. She took me to go see My Best Friend's Wedding, because she really wanted me to see that my city was worthy of people filming it and telling the stories of people that lived there. And it was amazing. I remember my mom taking me to go see Eve's Bayou, and we were like one of 3 people in the movie theater on a rainy afternoon. So
that's a perfect time to watch that movie.
Oh man, and that's the thing. And I saw it like at the age that Journey was at. So I'm looking at this movie, and like I'm looking at Journey, who I now know, and it was like seeing a young black girl be the center of a story. I remember watching Crooklyn and seeing a tomboy, at the center of the story. So I really just soaked up all these stories, and then at the same time was just as fascinated by the stories being told in my living room.
When it comes to sort of your come up in Hollywood, it really is sort of like the fantasy that a lot of writers think about. I mean, you moved to LA in 2006, and you started off as an assistant on the show Girlfriends, and the show's creator, Mara Brock Akil, like she recommended you to be the personal assistant to Gina Prince Bythewood, who, amazing director, loving basketball, and you sort of climbed through your ranks in that way, and to where you are now. I bring up working with Mara and Gina because I think that it's really amazing that for your first foray into Hollywood, you had these 2 legendary black women in TV and film as your mentors. And so even as as an assistant, even as sort of the lowly positions on the totem pole, like how did those early years shape you working under women like Mara and Gina?
It was invaluable. And I remember Gina said when I sat with her, she went it It was sort of an interview, but really just it was more of a meeting because like Mara, I came highly recommended, so she was like, "I'm just making sure you're not crazy because obviously you're good." So Mara recommended, but she said, "Be invaluable, be invaluable," and I never forgot it. And I think I've sort of carried that through my career, not just as an assistant, but as a creator, as a storyteller. People may not always agree with how I tell stories or the way I do it, but you can't deny my ability to do so. And I think and so therefore my voice and the space that I take up in the industry and the culture is very valuable. And that is something that's very important, knowing your value, understanding it. But the great thing about Gina and Mara and Ava is that they pushed me to define my voice for myself because they knew what they had to do to get there. So it was very evident that they always sort of pushed me to figure out who I was as a writer, as an artist. And eventually I did, and I created a path that even they couldn't help me with anymore because they're like, you're doing things that we haven't done. And I think that's also interesting because then I become a person who somebody will take a page out of my book and rewrite it as well. And I think that's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah. And that's what I find so interesting about your career, because I'm glad you brought up the, writing a spec script and learning how to sort of mimic the voice of a show, because I would say probably your big break as a writer was when you were a staff writer on Bones. And, in that, if you look at your IMDb page, it's like, it's a lot of web series and things that you created, and then Bones, and then just more stuff that you created. So it's like really with Bones, that was like the one instance where you were really in the working field as a writer, but in someone else's world. And so what do you gain from, as like a storyteller, as a creator, what do you gain from operating in a world that's not of your design?
I mean, you learn what you're not good at. It's good for you to sometimes not shine in an arena, so you can be aware of if you know what your weaknesses are, it tells you what your strengths are. And I knew that I was never going to shine in a Bones writer's room. It just wasn't for me. I didn't get it. And I was so grateful for that job because I needed it like a life jacket. But I also quickly learned that I had a very different voice and I was going to have a very different path. And I knew that instantly. I was like, this is temporary. And I remember I didn't get asked back for another season, but I remember sitting in my girl and Keiichi's office and we were vibing. And I remember just having the conversation. And it was like, there's something else out there for me. And I knew The Chi would eventually get made. I just didn't know how or where. But I had that script. I had table read that script, and I had a couple friends of mine over to listen and give me thoughts, and Keiichi being one of them, and Keiichi Carroll, who is now show running All American, which is like one of the top shows it was on network, and it's also available on Netflix. But she came because I had never written a drama before. So I wanted to holler at my drama writer friends to come and listen. And she went into work, and she was writing on Bones at the time. And so she went to work the next day and talked about it. She was like, I was to this amazing table read last night. And they were like, well, who is this? And can we read it? And they read it, and they were like, look, we were pretty sure something's going to happen with this pilot, but we want to be able to say we staffed you before it did. And so you wanted the job. And I was like, yeah. And while I was in that room, I just could not figure it out. I was like, this is not my jam. But then if you look at Bones and you look at The Chi, you can kind of get a sense as to why it isn't. But it was important for my development as a writer to be in there. My first staff writing gig was actually on a Nickelodeon show. How to Rock, with Masterpiece Daughter was the lead, Symphonique. Straight up. So, and I was paper teamed on that show, which means you're paired with another writer so they can get two writers for the price of one, even if you've never met that writer before.
Oh, wow.
And so, I did not shine in that room at all. And I think to me, it was like my rookie years of getting to play on the court and not really doing great. But then it was almost like once I got my own team and I could figure out my own thing. And by the way, it was still very difficult. I didn't have any power really on The Chi for the first couple seasons. And it wasn't until season 3 where I really started to get some real clout and some power, and I could use my voice. And now going to season 4, I really feel like we're cooking with gas now. And it's so interesting. A lot of people talk about Insecure's fourth season being their favorite season of the show. And I'm like, yeah, it takes a while for a show to find their footing. It takes a beat for a show to find its voice, just like any artist. And so it's always nice when shows get that space and that time and that room, and audiences are willing to grow and evolve with us, because you need that time to figure it out. And a lot of times it's easy to judge and go, why you do that, or point fingers. It's like, yo, if you're literally building a plane while it's flying in the air, and it's difficult, and you're trying to be creative, and you're trying to be smart, and you're trying to remember things like that. What did we do that already? Did this character do that? What? There's going to be holes. There's going to be things, but I have such even more greater respect for people that do this, that make TV and are meticulous. And I mean, it's because it really is, it can be mind numbing after a while, because all these characters are talking to you and you're trying to keep them all straight, and keep it fresh and keep it new and keep it exciting. So for me, those first two staff writing gigs were really important, because I needed to fumble in order to learn how to get back up again.
Yeah. And, I think one thing that really helped open the doors for you was your historic Emmy win for the episode that you wrote for A Master of None, the Thanksgiving episode. And, that episode, of course, was loosely based on your own coming out story. And, you said something that was, I loved the speech you gave at Essence's Black Women in Hollywood event, I think like 2 years ago. And you said that I realize that it's not just my job to make art. It's my job to be a light at the end of the tunnel for those other little lesbians in training, sitting in a small town wondering what life will be like for them when they come of age. And I think for most people from any marginalized community or communities, they always feel that responsibility to make sure that the door remains open for the people behind them. But is that ever a burden for you, like carrying the weight of expectations? Like, does that ever actually weigh you down?
It's actually very exhilarating, to be a beacon of light, to be a part of a transition of power. It's because it really is, the times are shifting and changing, and we're in that time right now. And they say they call them growing pains for a reason. It's not always easy to step into a new era. And what's exciting is that I have the space and the ability to help usher people in. But not just, I think to me it's dangerous if you just leave the door open. It's more about walking in with them, walking alongside them, because the journey can be difficult. It's meant to take you out. It's meant to discourage you. And so what I try to do is to be there when that discouragement comes, to remind them that this is temporary. Keep walking, keep going. Because leaving the door open is not enough anymore. We got to hold their hand and make sure they get in okay.
Also in that Essence speech, and you've said this before in interviews before, I mean, you said, being born gay, black, and female is not a revolutionary act. Being proud to be a gay, black, female is. And so what does that sentiment mean to you when you translate who you are into a show like 20s? Because it's, loosely based off of your come up in Hollywood. So, when you think about representation, when you think about, the stories of like the Black experience as a whole, and of course, like kind of narrowing it down to like your specific experience, like what does that act of like, kind of being a revolutionary in some way, being proud of, who you are, how does that apply to a show like 20s that's loosely based on your life?
Yeah, I mean, I think 20s is such an example of being yourself so authentically that people can't look away. I mean, there's so many pieces of me in it. Obviously, it's not exactly like me, but because it can't be, because she's in a modern day world. There was a second where I wanted to maybe do it and push it back to 2006. We lived through Obama being president and all the things that happened, while I was coming up, because it was slightly different, even though people don't like to think about it. But when I moved out to Los Angeles, like you said, in 2006, it was very different. It was still different. We didn't, Issa Rae wasn't on television yet. Donald Glover didn't have a TV show. It wasn't as I hadn't gotten a chance to make Dear White People with Justin. Get Out didn't exist. Hollywood was still in a space of, okay, black stuff can go over here. Okay, I mean, it almost feels like a world away. And so that's why sometimes when people judge or talk about things from 5, sometimes even 10 years ago, I'm like, guys, it was a completely different world. And even though that may seem like a short period of time ago. So for me, I think the show celebrates my journey thus far. But what it also does is it shows people that, a masculine presenting lesbian woman can be, funny and silly and messy and, ambitious and have 2 straight best friends and be crushing on her straightish boss. And it just sort of shows a very complicated character, but who's still very light and airy. It's not I May Destroy You. And but it's also not insecure. And I think that's what's so unique about it is that Hattie is her own thing. And I think what people can take away from the show is that everybody has a dream, whether they want to chase it, suppress it, or embrace it. Everybody has one. And I think that's what kind of is sort of this through line in the show. And I there's so many things about it that even though I obviously helped to birth it and create it, I love watching it and appreciating things about it because Justin Tipping, our producer, our amazing producer and director, finds so many things there. Tiffany Johnson did some beautiful work on the show. Jewel, who's an amazing director as well, came in. But I love Hattie sitting in Ida B's, house in that first episode, and that's her dream. She's like, you're doing it. And what I found is that often the person that's doing it is often just as broken and lost and confused as those who are trying to get to where they are. And to me, it was so beautiful just to see those 2 women who are really looking for something. And they kind of find it in each other, which is a nice little journey that we go on. But, it's so, I'm just really proud of it. I'm proud of the work that we pour into it because that writer's room was phenomenal. Obviously, Susan Fels Hill, who's the showrunner of the show, and she likes to call herself the doula, for me. She's amazing. And obviously, she showran A Different World. And so it's like Kobe getting a chance to play with Jordan. That's to me what it feels like when I work with her because the thing I always loved about Kobe was his appreciation for those that came before him. And how he honored them, but also wasn't afraid to be on the court with them.
Right.
And that to me, I remember watching this documentary before 20s happened and just remember thinking like, how do you go from obsessing over a player to having to, block them and DM up. And I think that to me was like the experience the first day on 20s with Susan. I had to kind of, yes, that's my hero, but she's also my co-pilot. And it was a phenomenal experience. And I think her experience and class and grace and my grit and unwillingness to take no for an answer, us coming together, I think really made something really beautiful.
It absolutely did. And I was going to ask, how did you even get her as a showrunner to begin with? Because I don't think she's been very active in like TV or film. So I think her last credit, last I saw, was like in 1999. So how did you get this, iconic showrunner? She wrote on the Cosby Show and was like a showrunner for A Different World. You got this person who's like your hero.
I know,
A Different World meant so much to you. Meant so much to
Black people of
a certain age, myself included. So how did you get Susan to be on your show?
Well, again, it came out of this community, being around Gina, because Gina wrote on A Different World. And Gina and Reggie wrote on A Different World. And so they would tell me stories and talk to me, and I would obviously tell them how much I loved the show and I was a big fan, and they talked to me about certain episodes that they were a part of. And they would just always talk about Susan. And I was like, I had read Susan's her memoir, Always Wear Joy. and loved it, obviously, and learned so much about her as a person. And Gina just like was so kind and said, look, you got to meet her. You need to meet Gina. And also, over the course of the period of time, I had met Yvette Lee Bowser as well, who basically worked as sort of Susan's number 2 on the show, who obviously went on to create Living Single. So basically, between Yvette and Gina, they got me Susan's information. They gave me her email. And she was coming to LA to take some meetings. And so I said, I asked if we could have like lunch, and Gina's like, she's going to be great. It's going to be awesome. We're going to have a good time. And so I went and had lunch with Susan, and it was a phenomenal lunch. And we sat outside. It was in Los Angeles. And I just was like overwhelmed. And she was so kind, and she had so many great stories to share with me. She's so funny and smart and elegant and graceful. I mean, she really is like Whitley Gilbert. Whitley Gilbert is loosely based on Susan, only Susan's very sweet and nice and kind. Whitley had her moments. But I mean, literally, like Diane Carroll was Susan Fail's godmother because she was, her mom's best friend. And so, I mean, the legacy is strong. So Susan, and I know, like I was working, I didn't have 20s yet, even at the time, I don't think. But once I told her, but I had it like, it was a loose idea. And I was just like, would you be down to help me with this thing if it ever comes about? Because I had a lot of false starts with the show. And she was like, yeah, sure. And just over the years, she would give me notes on the script, pitch me jokes, lines, things like that, tell me like edits, lifts. And so I just kept working on it. And it almost kind of felt like she was a showrunner already. And it finally, I mean, we went from BET to Hulu to TBS to BET again. And Susan had kind of lived through all of it and with me and was always encouraging and sending me notes. And when we finally got to BET, we got to TBS. When we got to TBS and we were going to shoot a pilot, I was like, come down to LA and be a part of the pilot process. Because if the show goes, I want us to have a shorthand and figure it out. So she did. She helped me with the pilot, made tweaks. And TBS paid for that pilot. Like we shot it on TBS's dime. And then they ultimately weren't able to do it because of some merger or something. And then Scott Mills over at BET, because I was already starting to do work on Boomerang, Scott was like, yo, if TBS says no to 20s, like let me know and we'll pick it up. And I was like, they're not that dumb. But TBS was like, yo, we can't do it. And I like couldn't get off the phone with them fast enough because I was like, I got a call to make. And I called Scott and I was like, if you're serious, let's go. And he was a man of his word. He showed everybody the pilot. They bought it from TBS and picked us up for 7 more episodes. And I asked Susan, I was like, are you ready? You ready to go? And she's like, yeah, let's do it. And she moved out to LA, and it's just been such a wonderful journey. And for us, it's bigger than the show. It's more about she and I building. Just we're family. It's bigger than the business, and I'm grateful that she's I call her an ancestor, even though she's still here with us in body and spirit. But I'm honored to be one of her descendants for sure.
And what I love, because you talked about sort of how your different styles kind of collide into the show, and one thing that I don't know if this came of it, but one of the many things that I love about the show is the tone of it. Like there's something about it. I think for example, it's there are those moments like where the parts in the score sound like an old Hollywood film.
Like where it's just like
the strings are rising and emotional moments are like super sad moments, and that's something that we don't really get to see Black stories presented that way that often. Right. So as 20 was coming together, like how did you decide when you knew what story you wanted to tell? How did you decide how you wanted to tell it? Because it is the style and tone of it is so specific.
Well, no, thank you for that question, and I'm really hoping people hear this answer. That is strictly from collaboration and from working with amazing artists. And I think a lot of times the way the press or media can make it seem is that like Shonda Rhimes does everything by herself. Ryan Murphy does everything by himself. Ava DuVernay does everything by herself. Like like we have amazing, collaborators. We have amazing production designers, editors, people, composers. They really help bring the show to life. And that really starts from obviously the script. Obviously that's the Bible. But when I give my script to Justin Tipping, he peeps the nod to All About Eve. And the theme that's in that movie that also kind of bleeds over into the show. And so what he does is he's like, that's interesting. Like, why not let that old school Hollywood, narrative play out, through this new school Hollywood world, where you have like score and you have these sort of like funny moments and things become quiet, and he's not afraid to make it feel cinematic, with the, him flying with the aerial shot of Los Angeles in the trees, and the fireworks, after which is a real thing at Cinespia. They'll do fireworks sometimes after a screening. But there's a magic about it. There's like a fairy dust about the city, and Justin Tipping, who was from LA, is able to capture that in a way that I could never have imagined. I would have never thought to do like an old school Hollywood score with this show. But he's hit on his pitch, because that's the thing, you get to put your whole look board and all that kind of stuff. And he also had this beautiful theme of like using pinks and blues. If you really go back and watch the show, it's pinks and blues, because he's playing with masculine and feminine.
Yep.
And how and what happens when they cross, and what happens when they're apart. And he had a beautiful collaboration with Derica, who was our costume designer. So he's saying like everyone, their wardrobe always has to be in a pink and a blue, or there's a white, or there's a little bit of, if there's an all white, there's a pink lipstick or something. And that was something that was so separate from me, that I didn't even really get that into. I remember him talking about it, but all I love to say is like, go off, go do your thing. Like my job is done. Like as long as the dialogue is right, and it's not, every now and then I'll say, okay, Justin, you're going a little too, because at one point he had this like tumbleweed going through
reel it in.
I know, where they were like on the lot, and I was like, Justin, we don't need the tumbleweed, bro, and the sound effect, but that's the thing, it's like, but we can have that, and also too with Tiffany Johnson, who's been my friend since I moved to LA, who is a phenomenal director. She got the idea with the Frank Sinatra, like that was just written in the lines that she listened to Frank Sinatra on her earbuds. But of course it's Tiffany Johnson, who loves things being fabulous and glamorous. She's like, so she had this sort of idea to do this whimsical thing where she's singing it, and this is her dream come true, and that is all Tiffany. Like I would have never thought to film it that way, and I have such a great respect for directors for that reason, because they bring the words to life in a way that I never could. And then also Amanda, we had an amazing composer as well, who did such a beautiful job, and also the editor and our writers, and obviously Susan and our production designers. It really is a village to bring these stories to life. And so that's really, I have to give credit to where it's due. It's really coming from Justin and but also to our amazing composer, and all, they all come together and collaborate and talk about it. And what I love is that half the time I'm not even in those conversations. Like I see a cut and I'm like, that's amazing, that's great. Or they'll say, hey Lena, I'm thinking about doing this. I'm like, cool, go for it. And I think that's what is so special about what we like to do at Hillman Grad, is we really want people to just do their thing, and when everybody's doing their thing, hopefully magic happens.
And you mentioned a little bit about the journey that it took to get 20s to air, and I think it's a great look for BET, because they've never really had a show like this before. But then that also kind of raises the question of, is a show like 20s getting as big of an audience as it deserves, really? And I think it kind of speaks to your show on Quibi as well, like your docuseries You Ain't Got These, which is really good. Like it's a very, very insightful look at like sneaker culture, and more largely like how Black culture has such a heavy influence in commerce. And so you have these amazing programs that you're producing and working on, but they may not always reach the size of audience that you would expect. I mean, Quibi is not pulling in the numbers that I know that they hope to pull in. So is when you consider where your content lives, is it a concern of just getting it out there and hoping that the audience finds their way to it, or how do you sort of like reconcile that with in your mind of like, you really want to get this out there, but of course you want it to go someplace where it will have an audience. So for you as a creator, like how do you straddle that?
I think it's a great question. I mean, the thing that comes to mind for me is Schitt's Creek. It's like, I think that's always my dream, that it shouldn't matter where it's at. If it's good, people will recognize it, they'll talk about it. And I think that's always my focus, is I had to get it out, but I want to make sure it was good. And, because, and I totally hear you. I definitely think like if 20s was on FX, if 20s was on HBO, if 20s was on, I don't know, we definitely would get more looks. Maybe it was on Netflix, we would get more looks, but to me, I still believe in the power of BET. And I believe that audiences that watch BET deserve quality programming. And they also deserve to get programming that is intersectional. And we deserve to have a space on that network as well. So a part of me is really excited that it lives there. And that's the win. But also too, I was very blessed. It's BET and Showtime are under the same conglomerate, Viacom. So David Nevins loved the show so much, who bought my first show, The Chi, which is on Showtime, said, he's like, I want to air this on Showtime. And I can, because it's the same company. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Has that ever been done before? He's like, no, not really. He's like, but I think that our audience would appreciate this show. And so not only did he put it on Showtime, but he put extended cuts of the pilot and the finale. So when you watch it on Showtime, you get a little extra. And then I also found some people are now watching it on Amazon Prime, where apparently it's available there too. So the cool thing about it is that 20 started at BET, but because it was, I think, solid and good, it grew over to Showtime, and now you can watch it on Amazon Prime, I believe. You can, fact check me, like the debates. But I've seen a couple people say, like, oh, I just caught this. And so what I love is that it seems like every other week or every month, I see a post on my DMs or on IG that said, I just discovered this show, or somebody just told me to check out this show. That's always been the thing I've wanted, is for my work to spread through word of mouth.
Yeah.
I mean, even people like saying, I'm just now watching Queen and Slim, man. What? This is, that's always exciting, because if there's a lot of work that people ain't trying to find. So if people are trying to find something I did, even if it's from a while back, or somebody whispered to somebody, yo, you should check this out. That's all I need, because I know what it takes for me to recommend something to someone. I have to really have loved it. I have to really have had an experience with it. In order for me to text somebody and say, yo, watch this shit, go check this out. So for somebody to do that with my stuff is really, I really appreciate it. And I've seen people record their TV and be talking and tag me or say, why don't you do this next season? I love that kind of engagement. Sometimes it's a little, exhausting, but I appreciate that people care so much and that they're that invested and that engaged, because it's way better than the alternative.
Yeah. And, speaking of shows that have had journeys, I mean, you touched on this a little bit earlier. I mean, obviously, The Chi, and this is a show that, had really found a really devoted audience, really. But, you mentioned that it kind of got away from you for a little bit. And, of course, they had to do a bit of course correction on season 3 because you weren't, you mentioned that you weren't really around for, the show got away from you. And of course, you had unfortunately had to let one of your actors go because of, the misconduct claims against him, the allegations. So going into season 4, I imagine that was really a great learning experience for you. As frustrating in the moment as it may have been, I imagine that's something that, you can kind of grow from that moment as a show creator. So going into season 4, what are you sort of walking away from those past seasons with that you're going to season 4 and kind of applying them to that?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because I talked to my showrunner Justin Hillian, who's more like a brother, and the writers, and I say, we got to look at this stuff like game footage. At the end of the game, athletes look at the game they just played and see what they do wrong, where they can improve, what they can do better. And I think that's how I look at every last season. It's okay, I didn't like that. This isn't working. How do we fix it? And so I always want to say the next season is our best season, and so this season 4 is, we just about to turn the outline for episode 2 of season 4. And I'm feeling really excited and really, just invigorated. We got some new, we always love bringing new blood to the table, and getting some fresh eyes on the show. And that to me is really cool. I think sometimes people are a little thrown when there's a little bit of musical chairs happen every season. But, we got the same showrunner coming back. We got a lot of returning writers, but it's always nice to bring some new people to the table, to just look at it through a different lens and to bring something else to it that wasn't there before. But I was really surprised by the level of engagement on season 3. The numbers went through the roof and the engagement was even crazier. We were trending every Sunday, did the IG Live after show, which was really helpful. I think for me, it's just about really connecting with the audience and talking to them. And I think in some areas, educating myself and educating them about things that we may not know enough about. I was really excited to bring our first character who is of the trans experience this season. Obviously, we'll be returning next season. And just really exploring the many areas that make up our lives. And there's so much to explore. And it may be about a city, but there are people it's not just people in Chicago that watch The Chi. I think there are people that can just relate to it, can relate to these communities, can relate to these people, and can relate to their struggles, but also to their joy and to their happiness. And that's what we really try to have a mix of, is a little bit of happiness, but there's always going to be despair as well in some of these places. But it's about how do we deal with it. And I think that to me is very exciting to see. And also too, like us removing cops from the storylines, which we were doing long before this revolution hit, because I was sick of it. I was sick of seeing cops in our narratives. I was sick of seeing what cops were doing to us in the real world. And so I was like, I don't want to have that in the narrative. And also too, it's just not that exciting to write for cops to me. So it's been a growing experience for sure.
Yeah, and I was going to ask because you with a show like The Chi or even like Queen and Slim, like you've shown that you are able to really deftly tackle the Black experience in America, really, and you've created this lane for telling these stories and being very topical and just really shining a light on these issues in a really artful way. And so when you think about all that's happening right now with, the pandemic affecting a disproportionate amount of people of color, you think about, the recent wave of the most recent wave. There's just wave after wave of protests against police brutality and racial injustice and the upcoming election. So when you think about just the tornado of bullshit that 2020 has been, how do you process that as a creator? Like, knowing that you have done such an amazing job of sort of reflecting society in your work, how are you processing that right now? How are you 2020 through your lens?
It's very interesting because I spent so much time, I think, focusing on the fires outside. I think now in this space of my career, I'm focusing on the fires inside. And I'm more so writing about solitude, personal legacy, emotional intelligence, relationships, how we define them, how we choose to redefine them, success, and our complicated relationship with it. So I think because I spent so much time writing about what's happening, not just now or again, I feel like the world has always been burning for us. Yeah. It's always been chaotic. Yeah. I know a lot of people have been revisiting Malcolm X's autobiography, and I'm no different. I went back and was reading, about his mother being pregnant with him, KKK coming up to their home looking for his father. America literally driving her crazy. Yeah. So this is not new. And so I think, yes, we can on some days want to write about what's happening outside, and that's fair and valid. But I think I'm in a space now when I want to write about what's going on inside our houses. Yeah. Because that residue is left on us. Right. That tar, when we come inside, how do we wipe it off?
Yeah.
And I think, you're obviously tackling that through, your production company as well. I mean, there's obviously the work that you create yourself, but then, the work that you're producing with your production company, Hillman Grad Productions. And, I would love to hear a little bit about about the work that you're choosing to produce, because I'm thinking I actually had a chance to see the 40-year-old version of like Rada Blank's film that you're producing, and it's so funny, so good. So I'd love to hear a little bit about the projects that when you think about like what you want Hillman Grad Productions to stand behind, like what do those projects look like exactly?
They're all over the place. I mean, if somebody could see our slate, although the truth is, I'm glad you saw it, you've seen 40-year-old version, somebody could argue, oh, that feels like a movie that Hillman Grad would make, Hillman Grad Productions would make. It's about a black woman trying to figure out who she is in New York, and she's a playwright, and so it's there's a reason why I love Rada as the person in real life. And so I think that's why I get such a kick out of her voice and who she is. And I'm just really happy that other people get a kick out of her too. I think that's always, because that's really all you're banking on. You're like, I hope people like this as much as I do. But I think, but also too, we will probably surprise people with some of the other things we have coming out. Because we're telling stories from a lot of different marginalized communities. And I think that's something that I think people don't expect. They think, okay, you're a black woman who happens to be queer, so you're going to make stories about black people, women, and queer people. And the truth is for me, for something to come through Hillman Grad, I don't have to be, in it. I don't have to know the filmmaker personally. I don't have to maybe even be as obsessed with it as one of my execs is. If someone at the company is like, this is important to me, that we get this done, I'm going to stand behind it 120%. And therefore, Hillman Grad will look like more than just me. It'll look like the people that make up this company that I'm proud to work alongside. And I think that to me is what's exciting. And there's so many different things that we're doing, and whether it be with 40-year-old version, producing an anthology series called Them with Little Marvin over to Amazon. And, and it's just been really exciting working with, Swiss and Tim on something for Versus, which was sort of born out of just a natural connection with Swiss via social media, and him being like, yo, I want you to document this. And so that's what we started doing. And we got announcements about that coming soon, trying to get the paperwork done. Please stay tuned. But it's just, I think I really just have a real passion for storytelling of many kinds, and whether it be documentarian type of filmmaking, narrative filmmaking. We're really trying to get in the documentary space, but we're also getting into the children's platform too, because kids understand story sometimes better than adults, and they love storytelling, obviously. And so we're trying to make sure that the messaging that they're getting is not to blend in with the crowd, but to stand out from it rather. So it's just very exciting. It's and also too, we're the music side is also something I'm intrigued about, so stay tuned for that. So we're really expanding and growing and learning as we go. And I don't ever want to promise people perfection, and I'll never tell someone that I won't fumble at some point again in my career. It's like, but I'm a human and an artist, and I'm not supposed to be perfect. I'm supposed to look like you. And I think that's what really connects us. And I really do think sometimes society tries to separate those that live their lives publicly and those that live their lives privately. But the truth is, we're all fighting the same fight. We're all going through the same shit. And I'm aware of the privileges that I have. And I think that's why I have a great responsibility to pour into community and to stand by people as much as I can. Because if I don't do it, then I won't be doing my job.
Yeah.
These issues of lack of inclusion has always been a problem, but we haven't really been talking about them in an earnest way like we are now. And so, it's, in a sense, it's like there's never been a better time to be part of like a marginalized community and, creating shows and creating films. So, when you think about sort of the trajectory of your career, what are you telling these people that are coming to you for advice? What are you telling these, this next generation of creators that, want to tell their own stories? Like, what does that advice look like from your perspective?
Oh man, and I hear from them, and I try to respond as much as I can. We have something called the Hillman Grad Mentorship Program, which we're kind of like shifting to the Hillman Grad maybe Academy, and that's a big reason for that is because I kind of say it's like we want to be like the Seattle Grace of production companies. We want to be a teaching hospital, so it's like we want to teach. The big thing that we provide are classes, resources. But also we refer people to reputable classes, because the truth is like there are a lot of people getting got out here where they're like, oh, pay me $1,000, I'll teach you how to write a screenplay. Pay me $10,000, I'll get you a movie role. But it's like, and we're just like, I've never heard of this person. I don't know who they are. Don't give them your money, please. So I think a big thing for us is like, I don't care where you live, how old you are, what your circumstances happen to be. If you got a story and you're willing to, work at it and learn the craft and take the time that it takes to really hone your gift and get it done right, the sky isn't the limit. It's just the view. And that's all we want is like, if you come to us and say, hey, I want to be a director, I want to be an actor, I want to be a producer, I want to work in costume design, I want to be an editor, I want to be a composer, I want to be a production designer, all those things, we have a place to point you. And sometimes people come to us and think that they're ready to do that thing right then. And a big part of our mentorship is helping them understand like, hey, I don't think you're ready for the prime time yet. But if you come and we want to kind of show you the basics and maybe kind of help you get better with writing dialogue, maybe help you with how to really develop character, how to be able to tell a story, and to make sure you have a strong B story as well, and make sure your ending isn't expected. Those are the things that I'm excited to talk to people about. And a lot of times, folks, there's a difference. There are those that are like, man, I'm good, I got it. And then there are those that are like, please, I want to learn. Like, I don't know how to really write this story I have, but if it's going to take me a year, 2, 3 years, 4 years to tell it the right way, I'm willing to be patient and take that time. Those are folks that I'm excited to talk to and to bring into our program. And we'll give them the thing. We'll say like, hey, take a look at this script and give me coverage on it. And somebody goes like, hey, I got a job, I don't really have time to read that, and then others are like, all right, I'm gonna get to it. I got some stuff going on, but I'm gonna read it and get you some coverage on it for top of next week. Okay, cool. I'm willing to be with folks that are willing to put in the work, put in the time, and willing to be patient until they're ready. And that's really how we get down. We're not about to just say, here's a job. It's more about, okay, well, what are you willing to do to get to where you're trying to go? And I think sometimes folks think you get a golden ticket and then all of a sudden you get to own Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. It don't work that way. You really got to take the steps and really show up. Now, some people come more like they're more fully baked and you're like, okay, you got something here. Let us like help you develop it, dust it off. And if it's not right for us to produce, we know who to pass it on to make sure this gets done the right way. So we'll always be honest. But folks that don't want to hear the honesty, it's very telling. It's like, okay, get where you at. But some folks are like, you're right, this isn't really strong, but I want it to be. How do I get there? Okay, perfect. Those are the type of folks that I can really engage with and we can help. And we have a lot of success stories over at Hillman Grad, and we want to continue to do that because we really want to populate this industry with folks that got a story to tell, but may not come from a show business family, that may not be 23, that may not be cisgender. You know what I mean? It's like, so we really want to help anyone that is willing to do the work. And that's what's so exciting when you see all their hard work, culminate in something really beautiful.
To that end, like you wrote a really interesting column for Variety magazine, like where you're calling for there to be a fine for studios that don't meet inclusion standards. And you said we need mandates for inclusion. The studios, networks, and streamers all need to live by new rules, and if they don't live by them, there needs to be financial repercussions. And so for you, I mean, you obviously have more insight into the inner workings of Hollywood than I do. So how feasible is that to you? Like when you think about making this something that could actually be a rule in Hollywood, like because I think you in the column you were like the only color that Hollywood cares about is green. So do you think that this is feasible, fining studios and networks for not having not meeting inclusion standards?
Well, I think the Academy has taken definitely a leap forward in that you have to meet a certain level of inclusivity to be considered for Best Picture, which is also what Hollywood cares about: green and trophies. So a lot of folks obviously, a lot of folks aren't that happy about that. I'm sure this will continue to be a conversation moving forward. But to me, it's definitely a step in the right direction. Because Best Picture means a lot in in Hollywood, and
winning an Emmy means a lot. I mean,
exactly. I think those two academies, have a lot of influence on the industry and where people stand, and so I think it's going to be a great step forward. But I also think that it's really going to really come down to studios, because studios are really the banks. Anytime you see a studio, Netflix is its own in-house studio, so they all these streamers often pay for them. Like Amazon, like we don't have we do have a studio on them, but oftentimes these streamers don't need a studio; they're the ones doing it, and so it's kind of weird for them to fine themselves for not doing the right thing. Right. But the great thing is there's a huge pressure now. That very few shows want to not have any Black or brown or queer people involved, because you look like something out of the Stone Ages. And so, but I think a big thing to me is we don't just want to have representation in front of the camera, but you want to have representation behind it as well, in terms of the crew, in terms of your set, and also your writer's room. But I really think, to me, that if you could be fined, because money is a big deal. Like a lot of times with these writing fellowships, they'll give you a writer for free. And so then for a season, and then the next season, the writer's gone, not because they didn't do a good job, but because, well, now you costing me money. So to me, imagine if they flipped that and said, if you don't have a writer in there, you will be fined. And it'll come out of your budget. And I just think it's really about flipping the narrative, really. And again, like I said, it's like, people wanted segregation to stick around. And even when it was lifted, like there was unrest. I mean, there were sit-ins to ensure that literally white people were yanking Black people off of a stool in Woolworths because they did not want to step into the future. And so I feel like that's what it's going to look like in Hollywood, and so it's like you need to. There needs to be some repercussions. Otherwise, the status quo will continue to exist. But the good news is no one wants to be shamed. No one wants to be embarrassed. Some conglomerates don't care. There's a couple that are big enough where it doesn't matter how much people rage against the machine. But I do think that there are people walking inside the machine and dismantling it from inside. I think with some of those bigger ones, that's the way it's going to have to happen. They're going to have to build relationships with people, particularly Black people, where Black people say, like, this will not stand if you want me to work for you. And I know I'm doing that a lot of the places I'm at. And the great thing is, a lot of these places that I'm working with, they're like, yeah, we want to change, and they want to know how. And I don't mind engaging in those very honest conversations.
And you said, it's so funny that you said, they don't want to step into the future, because I was going to ask you, when you think years, decades down the line, and people are kind of looking at this time in history with the Me Too movement, with, all the civil unrest, with, the LGBTQIA plus, movement. You think about all these things that are happening in this moment and the art that's coming from it. What do you want your work to say? Like, when you think about the body of work that you're creating, that you're producing, what do you want it to say when people are looking at this moment in history years down the line? Because I do think that you're creating a body of work that is going to last, that is going to stand the test of time. Like, I do see that trajectory for you of being someone like, like a Spike Lee, like someone who's like, whose work is something that it continues to be referenced time and time again. So for you, what is it that you want your work to say years down the line?
It's interesting. I have this thing about, what the takeaway is and what the legacy will be. I really don't think it's for me to say. Mm-hmm. Because I go back to, these writers of the past, and I revisit their work, and it says something different to me every time I go back. It depends on where I am in my life. at that time, or what I'm going through, or what I need from them. And so, to me, the good stuff, it evolves over time. You know, I think that's what's so great about certain pieces of work, that when it comes out, it means one thing. But then when it's, re-released 10 years later, it means something else. And then 10 years later, it says something else and says something else. So I guess my biggest thing is for my work to continue to speak, no matter what time someone watches it in. And that they can take something from it, that it can, help somebody make sense of something. Hopefully it can help someone better understand themselves. That's really what I want the work to do. And I really do leave a piece of myself in all of it. It's a way for me to work through certain things that I haven't figured out yet. And I think that, I think there was this frustration with the Queen and Slim ending, and people wanting the characters to have a win, or wanting it to be sort of ointment, rather.
Triggers. Oh my God.
But the thing is that my process doesn't necessarily have to heal someone else's pain. And I think that's too much burden on it. Because if I don't have a win, if I'm not winning in that moment, if I'm wanting to be brutal in the art, I have a right to do that. Because anyone taking that right away from me puts me in a form of bondage. Because no one's telling Tarantino not to be brutal. No one's telling Scorsese not to be brutal. No one's telling the makers of Game of Thrones not to be brutal.
I mean, if you're just going to go ahead and say facts, go ahead. Oh my God.
It's like, to me, I understand this idea of like, I want to see Black people just be joyful and no trauma. But the truth is, to not acknowledge my scars is to act as if they aren't there. And if I don't acknowledge my scars, I'm going to keep getting hit. It's almost like only acknowledging Gordon Parks photos where the Black people are smiling in them. Some of his photos are hard to look at.
Yeah.
The Emmett Till photo is hard to look at, but it's supposed to be.
Yeah. Whew. I'm gonna leave it there because you're absolutely right, and I think this is just, and I honestly feel like people can see through your work that you were meant to do this, and people can see through your work that you're passionate about this, and so I thank you not only for this interview but for the work that you're doing, because it's just phenomenal. So
thank you, Lena. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you, family.